at the Black Church, we usually talk about the pastors, the sermons, the choirs, but let's be honest. The Black Church has always run on the labor, the love, and the leadership of Black women. And at the same time, it's also a place that has shaped, limited, and sometimes constrained Black women. So today, I want to talk about how Black women's roles in the church were shaped by respectability politics, but also how the church became a space where Black women gained leadership, power, community, and visibility. The Black church influenced Black women's experiences by promoting values of morality, respectability, and virtue that both uplifted and constrained them. Through the works of people like Saidiya Hartman, Elizabeth Jones, and others, we can see how women negotiated, resisted, and redefined these standards across different eras of Black history. So, first, to understand this dynamic, we have to look at history. After emancipation, the Black church became the first major institution that Black people fully controlled. It served as a spiritual refuge, a political headquarters, and a cultural home. But Angela Davis reminds us in Women, Race, and Class that post-slavery society deeply feared and limited the autonomy of Black women, especially around their sexuality and independence. Even though the church was a space of liberation, it did not escape the long shadow of slavery's gendered and racialized stereotypes. Black women were expected to embody the moral character of the entire race and to counter the racist narratives that painted them as hypersexual, immoral, dangerous, or angry. Hazel Carby's work, Policing the Black Woman's Body, helps us see how this mindset formed. She argues that Black womanhood, after slavery, was shaped by an effort to reconstruct the image of Black women as respectable, disciplined, and pure, in an effort both rooted in racial survival and gender norms. Carby shows that in the aftermath of slavery and during Reconstruction, Black communities placed enormous emphasis on proper behavior and morality for women especially, in part because their bodies had been sites of violence and control for centuries. This historical context is important and shaped the culture of the Black church. The church became the institution most invested in defining Black women as morally upright and respectable, as a way to protect them from racist deceptions, but also as a way to discipline and monitor them. So, the complicated relationship between Black women and respectability politics didn't appear out of nowhere. It emerged as a strategy, a survival tactic, and a form of social control. Respectability was supposed to shield Black women from the violence of white supremacy, but it also carried heavy expectations and rules that policed their appearance, their behavior, and their sexuality for generations, and still does to this day. This meant and means that Black women are seen as the moral backbone of the community, but that also meant that they were heavily policed. So how they dressed, how they talked, how they lived, because they were expected to be the face, again, of Black respectability and morality. This was and is a heavy burden. Ellison Diaz notes that churches often reinforced purity culture, linking a woman's worth to modesty and sexual restraint. Women were taught to protect their reputation at all costs, and these standards were framed as protection from racist stereotypes like the Jezebel, a hypersexual stereotype, but they also reinforced the idea that Black women had to perform and be perfect to be respected at all. So Carolyn West's work on controlling images, so for example, Mammy, Jezebel, shows how these stereotypes shaped expectations placed on Black women even within Black communities, especially within the church. So the church became the place where women were expected to push back against these stereotypes through modest behavior, hard work, and self-sacrifice. But the pressure to embody respectability often came at the cost of personal expression, desire, and authentic acceptance. Kevin Gaines explains that respectability politics came about as a strategy to fight racist narratives, as we spoke about before, especially in early NAACP organizing. But for Black women, respectability meant carrying an unfair burden. They were told that their behavior represented everybody. So one wrong move could be used as evidence of Black inferiority. And yet here's the twist. The church is still one of the first spaces where Black women became visible as leaders. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black women played major and central roles in building churches, schools, and community organizations within the Black community. Evelyn Brooks Heinbotham shows that Black Baptist women used the church as a platform for activism, education, and racial uplift. They raised funds, taught kids how to read, organized Sunday schools and missionary societies, built schools, and helped define the culture and the values of Black public life. These women believed that by presenting themselves as educated, disciplined, and morally sound, that they could challenge white supremacy and open doors to equality. Cheryl Townsend Gilkes describes this work as a labor of love, a phrase that captures both the devotion and the burden Black women carried. Gilkes argues that the labor Black women performed inside the church, so cooking, fundraising, teaching, organizing, and more, created essential networks of support and care that kept Black communities alive. This labor wasn't only spiritual, it was political, it was communal, and it made the church a safe haven for all people, a place where women's leadership thrived, even when it wasn't formally recognized through positions like priesthoods or pastors. Patricia Hill Collins adds that the church created a distinctly Black feminist consciousness rooted in care, survival, and community building. Through teaching Bible study, mentoring younger women, organizing programs, and leading choirs especially, Black women were able to develop intellectual and political authority. Many of these roles gave women their first platforms for public speaking, leadership, and organizing, doing so at a time where women, especially Black women, were not given those opportunities elsewhere. Patricia Hill Collins writes that even without official titles, Black women carved out their own spheres of influence, so missionary societies, youth groups, choirs, etc., Sunday school. So, mothers boards and women's groups especially were spaces where women had real power. They shaped community practices, managed finances, organized events, educated children, and supported the community and families as a whole. So in these spaces, Black women learned public speaking, financial management, event planning, mentorship, and organizational leadership. This created a double bind because Black women were expected to be the pillars of leadership and society, morality, and respectability while also being selfless, pure, disciplined, modest, and morally flawless. These standards, impossible standards, often produce shame, guilt, fear of judgment, and a sense that women had to shrink themselves to maintain community approval. Still, for many, the church was the first place their voices mattered, and for others, it was a training ground for activism. Alexis Pauline Gumbs shows how traditions of care, education, and mentorship in Black women's church work laid the groundwork for broader Black feminist activism and organizing. Saidiya Hartman, in Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, reminds us that Black women have always created freedom in spaces and places that try to define them. Hartman describes waywardness as the quiet, rebellious acts through which Black women rejected the pressures and the surveillance, the respectability, and moral expectations placed on them. Even when the church enforced strict codes of conduct, many women found ways to resist these constraints, taking back their agency. Elizabeth Jones' intersectional analysis helps explain why these pressures are so powerful. In Looking Back to Move Forward, Jones argues that stereotypes like the Jezebel or the matriarch of the family don't operate alone. They intersect with legal, political, and religious systems that shape Black women's daily lives today. This is what Patricia Hill Collins named intersectionality. Intersectionality is about how multiple systems of oppression can overlap and create unique challenges for people whose identities are not a monolith. In this case, Black women have had to live in a racist society, especially in the 20th century and the early 19th century, that denied them their basic humanity. And at the same time, they are women living in a patriarchal society that tells them that they must behave in certain ways to earn basic dignity and respect. Both systems of oppression here combine to tell Black women they are inferior and have to work twice as hard to be respected. In the context of the church, these systems of oppression, combined with religious morals and traditional values surrounding purity and traditional gender roles, influenced how morality and virtue are defined. Intersectionality reveals how Black women face, again, racialized expectations of purity, gendered expectations of submission, and even class-based judgments about modesty and about religious expectations as well. All at the same time. So this means that respectability politics is not simply about personal choices, it's a response to overlapping systems of oppression and a strategy. Brittany Cooper adds that Black women's anger, often suppressed in church spaces and in other spaces, can be a source of clarity and strength. She frames anger as a form of truth-telling, a righteous force that challenges silence and restraint. Many Black women experience tension between the love they have for the church and the pain of being silenced or overlooked. And on a personal level, many Black women have a complicated relationship with the church, including me. Cooper writes in eloquent rage about how the church taught her strength, but also silence, how it gave her a spiritual home, but also rules about what a good Black woman should be and what a good Black woman looks like. That tension is real for many of us today. The church gives Black women community, identity, spiritual grounding, and platforms for leadership, but it also asks them to shrink themselves, to be the example, the role model, the one who sacrifices. Even today, women often do most of the labor, while men occupy the formal leadership roles within the church. Black women are expected to be strong, yet modest, outspoken, yet polite, powerful, yet submissive, and exist in this paradox. Black women shape the Black church, but the church also shaped Black women, at times, sometimes in ways that uplifted them, and others in ways that constrained and limited them. The story isn't all good or all bad, it's both. An understanding that helps us imagine a church that honors Black women's labor, trusts Black women in their voices, and doesn't rely on respectability to measure their worth. Because Black women were never just the helpers. They were the architects, they were the organizers, the visionaries, and they still are. Thank you.